Hi everyone, my name is Richard, and the purpose of this video is just to compare some damp meters that I've got. I've got a Caravan, and like most caravanners, damp is a concern, continual concern for all of us. And so I've got some Caravan-like materials, not real Caravan materials, but similar ones. And I just want to see what the behavioural characteristics are with the different meters. So the first one I've got is one from Aldi that's got the 2 pins. They're about £9.99. They come up periodically. It's quite an old, tried and trusted technology, and quite safe to use, but the problem is it does leave marks on the Caravan. Now, if you are testing your own Caravan, you can make sure you always do it in exactly the same places. So for example, I do it in the lower corners of the windows, and I always reuse the same holes. But if you were going to look at a Caravan, you may get some objections to using these, because if every person looking at a Caravan stuck holes all over it, it would soon look a right mess. I use this one on the materials one, which is wood. So in a way, I think that will be kind of the reference really for the other two. Then the second one is a Proster pinless device, about £35 off Amazon. I've used that quite a bit, so we'll try that. And the one that I've just recently purchased is this one with a kind of bobble on top. Again, it's a Proster device, but works differently. On this particular one, I select hardwood because it seems to give reasonable results compared to the pinned one. This one doesn't have that as a setting. It has a display, and in theory you convert it, but we'll compare them anyway, the readings that we get. In terms of materials, I've got 5mm ply, so this one's relatively dry. I've got a bit of foam that goes behind it, and then on a book, which obviously will have some impact on the pinless ones. And I've also got a wet bit. I soaked this for several hours yesterday, and then put it in a bag so that the water was able to permeate the whole thing, and so it's not actually surface wet, which might change the characteristics of the readings. I've also got some tin foil, see whether that has any effect on the pinless ones. I've also got a bit of plastic that we can put on that would potentially imitate the vinyl covering. But anyway, I'll just run through it and let you have the results. So we start off with the dry one. I mean, one good thing is when I took this out of my garage yesterday, it was at about 22-23% on the pin one. While I'm doing it now, it's actually down to 10. So that 30 hours of being indoors in the house, it's actually dried out quite significantly, which is encouraging if, if you've got some recent wet in your Caravan. You'd probably have to take the vinyl covering off, but it will dry out. Of course, it's a lot more difficult if it's been behind there for a long time. It will have started to rot, and also if it's got into all the insulation, etc. But anyway, let's start with this one. So in the dry section, on the dry piece, that comes up with a reading of 13%. This particular pinless one, set on hardwood, hey, 9.9. That is pretty good, or actually 10. So that's not too far out. This particular one, you actually have to calibrate it each time in the air, and then you can use it. That comes up at 8.6. So that one's under at this particular stage. You have to be very careful with these, because what can happen is if your hand is close by, it will quite significantly affect the reading. Actually, that's now dropped down to about 7. So if we move on to the wet piece, using the trusty old Aldi one. That comes in at 27.2. That now is coming in at 35.5. So that is dramatically, well, not dramatically, but that is over reporting. And in fact, if you push down, it goes up to 44. This particular one, 37. So as you can see, they're over reporting by probably about 10 on wet wood, about 10%. So what's the effect of metal behind the wood? So for example, say you've got a bracket. Now it's not going to really affect those because they're just simply measuring in the wood. But in terms of this one, it goes up to 43. And this one goes up to 45. So as you can see, if you've got metal present, it will significantly increase and make it look like you've got a much bigger problem than you imagine. In fact, if I use the dry bit, which if you remember was 13%, this is now measuring 19, and this one 28. So as you can see, having the presence of metal with the pin one says you haven't got a problem because it's less than 15% using the sort of common numbers. But with both of the pinless meters, the presence of metal such as brackets will actually report, or cables, will actually report as having damp where it actually isn't there. Now, in all fairness, even the really expensive protometer that the professionals use at approaching £500, even that says that when you use these kind of devices, it's only to detect potential damp. You still have to use a pin device in order to confirm the findings of the pinless device. So from that perspective, you know, you have to accept the limitations of the technology and just use it as a caution. So I think these pinless devices work well when you've got a dry environment, but when you've got an environment that is wet, they'll probably over-report it, but at least it's actually signalling that you've got a problem, and it's at that stage that you need to use those, yeah, in order to confirm it. So I hope you found that useful. It obviously gives us a bit of an insight as to how they behave in different circumstances. The benefit of this one is you can get into smaller spaces because it's a probe. But as I say, you have to keep your hands out of the way. And if it's actually a small space, there's a much higher chance that there's going to be metalwork, cables, etc. running in there. So, you know, one could argue that that is not necessarily such a big benefit as it is, but it is more convenient, I think. So I hope you found that useful, and good luck with keeping all of that damp at bay. Cheers.